Daryl, through the redemption story and this tool, we've been able to talk a lot about, obviously, redemption, the growth of redemption from Christian Church at Jasper, CCJ, till now. But as we look at the Christian church as a whole, and the movements and the varying opinions that exist around the world, how does redemption fit into that, or where does that play, if it does at all?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of people want to know, what kind of church is this? And years ago, our major publication in our tribe of churches, which I'll explain in a minute, was the Christian Standard, and they had an issue that was called, what kind of church is this? And it just kind of broke down what kind of church is this, because most people come from denominational backgrounds. So you might come and say, I grew up in a Methodist church, or I grew up in a Baptist church, or I grew up in a Catholic church. And we know, I think most people who aren't even a part of those groups know what they are. They know a little bit about their denomination, that there's these denominations, and obviously there's dozens upon dozens upon dozens of church denominations out there. And that is not actually who we are. We're brothers to them and sisters to them, but our group is not a denomination. The independent Christian churches of Christ, actually is something that came out of, our roots are the Restoration movement. A lot of people have heard of the Reformation movement, where Martin Luther said, hey, I don't like this about the way that the predominant church, which is the Catholic Church at the time, operates, so we're gonna reform, and that's that obviously has spawned many great congregations around the world and missions and so on and so forth. But then there was a group of people, really a few years later, that said, you know what, we don't want to reform anything. We want to restore the church back to what it was in the Bible. And a couple of Barton W. Stone and Campbell, guys in the Americas anyway, because this happened also in Great Britain, but in the Americas, it said we don't want to follow these denominational man-made rules and regulations, but we just want to go back to what the Bible said. And so they just kind of broke off and started having revival services where they just taught and said, let's try to just restore the Bible and the church to what it was in the Bible times. Let's look at the New Testament church, the polity, the leadership, the doctrine, the mission of the church, and let's restore it. It's almost like a patternism where maybe when you're in school and you learn to write the letter D, and you would follow the dots to do it. It's almost like, hey, let's go back to the Bible and see the dots, the pattern of the New Testament church in doctrine and in mission, and let's try to do that. And that's the Restoration movement. And you can learn a lot more about it if you look it up and about its leaders. But one of the great sayings of the Restoration movement is, we're not the only Christians, but we want to be Christians only. In other words, there's a lot of other Christians out there. Some of those denominations I spoke of are Christians, but they go by some other name. We're brothers and sisters of them. They're the church. We're not the only Christians, but we just go by Christian, just a Christian church. So when I was growing up, and I'd say I grew up in the Red Quarry Christian Church, and they'd say, what kind of church is it? And I'd say, it's a Christian church. Yeah, but what kind of church is it? And they didn't understand, and I didn't really understand why they didn't understand, because it's all I ever knew is that the Christian church is just elder-led from within a local group of believers. And we tried together with other people, formed some Bible colleges with some other people, support missionaries with some other people, support church camps with some other people. But each church is autonomous, led from within by elders that come from the local communities where the churches are. And that's kind of the Restoration movement. So they'd say, we're not the only Christians, we're in Christians only. They'd also say, in the essentials, we're going to have unity, like Jesus is the only way, the Bible is the Word of God. We're going to have unity in that. In the non-essentials, that's some secondary doctrines that maybe there's some open for some interpretations. We have unity in essentials. In the non-essentials, we're going to have some liberty. Like, you don't have to believe exactly like me, and that each group, led by their elders and their understanding and study of God's Word, could make decisions on it. And then in all things love. So in essentials, unity, in non-essentials, liberty, and in all things love. And so, in other words, even if we disagree on something, we're still going to have the love there. And that's been a driving force in the church, because there's a lot of preferences, there's a lot of approaches, and we say, you know what, it's okay that you had this. Our group's going to do this, and it's been pretty liberating to operate really with that mentality, because there's been times down through the years where people would come to Redemption and not like our style at all, and we'd say, that's okay. Can we help you find a church? You may not love it. You're welcome here. You may not love it here, but let's help you, because we're not the only church in town. And I believe in some ways God has used different types of churches to reach different types of people, And so that's really the heart of who we are. The Restoration Movement is like the only thing that is absolute here is that Jesus is the way, His Word is our guiding path, and that we're on mission for Him. So you have to be on mission. That's the key, to evangelize the world, to reach the world for Jesus. And so that's kind of who we are as a church.
Wow, that's so interesting and PhD level for the novice sitting here in this piece. So many questions coming out of that. So thank you for sharing. Let me start with this question. And I think it's an obvious answer. If I heard you properly, the seed of planning the church that you brought to Jasper has always been in the non-denominational mode, in the Restoration Movement.
Yep.
Have there been any challenges to be faced while growing the church in that regard, to stay focused to the core of the Restoration Movement?
Absolutely. There's challenges on both sides of that. One of the big challenges, our movement of people sometimes are independent, and we've been fiercely independent. And so we tend to go at it alone, and so a lot of pastors, ministers are left out cold to dry. I mean, they lose their job. It's nobody's sending them somewhere else, and so there's some challenges in that. Supporting our missionaries have to go get support from churches, where in the denomination will send them, and so there's a lot of challenges, but there's so much freedom in it too. I'd say the biggest challenge in starting a church out of that movement is so many people would come with their it's not man-made, but their preconceived ideas of what church should be. And that's not exclusive to non-Restoration Movement churches. That's, a lot of churches within our movement think that there's only one way to do things, and if you don't do it. Even to our style and approach, like, people would not get it, and they would be like, why don't you have pews in your church? Or, we want to give you these pews. No, thank you, but you can give them somebody else. Well, why wouldn't you want them, that kind of thing. And so there's some challenges that way. Another challenge is literally, we didn't have anybody give us finances to start up Redemption. If you're planning a church in a probably one of the denominations, it's being planted by the denomination. And so we didn't have that. When I started out, I basically depended upon the kindness of my family and my home congregation. The Red Quarry Christian Church supported me, gave me $100 a week in the early days, because I didn't have a salary at the church. We hadn't started taking up offerings or anything like that. So I did that, substitute taught. My wife worked. We weren't even married at the time. This is when we first started dating. She worked and lived in French Lick, and she would help support me in that way. My parents were generous, bought a lot of the early supplies of the church, the communion supplies, and so on and so forth. And so really the challenge is you don't have a lot of resources when you're starting independently. But I think there's some blessings in that too. Like, we didn't start with all the nice things, and so we knew that it was about God's work, not about all the nice things. And so we tried to keep that attitude when you start being able to have some of the modern conveniences and technology and of the church today. And so anyway, that was a challenge for sure, to do that.
Thank you for the clarification. Just as I'm hearing you respond a bit, and you talk about preconceived notions. And I'm going to speak personally a little bit. For me, a struggle through inferiority and becoming comfortable in a denominational church created a great deal more self-pressure in where my path was in the maturation process with God. The Restoration Movement, the church you've built here, those preconceived notions I had, having those kind of helped relieve that pressure as I came, and you were able to get rid of those pieces. in that aspect. So I love what you're saying and connecting. And where I'm going with this, I'm sorry for the long-winded question here, is you talk about, there's some people that redemption is just not right for in that piece. And that's okay, right? There's
Absolutely,
some
100%.
restaurants that are not right for some
Yeah,
people.
that's right.
There's some fast stops not right, some schools not right, just the way life is. What typically, when individuals approach you and say, we've been here and we're finding this just isn't for us, what typically do you take away from that? Because I know, knowing you and knowing the success you and the team have had with Redemption, there's always something to learn while you're continuing to serve those individuals who maybe need to find a different church home or want to find.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing you want to find out is there some kind of legitimate problem or something lacking in our ministry that we're not providing that we can provide for them, so that's important. But then secondly, to understand, okay, is this preferences versus that? Like sometimes it's just preferences. We had a lady a while back that just didn't like the modern way we did some of the old songs and the Christmas songs, and she just thought it was very disrespectful. Well, that's a preference thing, and that's okay. She probably didn't love the way we did it, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. So you got to separate. Okay, is there a preference or is there a legitimate need? We, there's been times in life where someone had something happen in their life, and I wasn't there for them because I didn't know about it, and I felt awful about that. People tend to think ministers have this this premonition and they can know when something happens, but a lot of times we don't if we don't hear about it. But so then what happens, and I try to find out, okay, how can we better learn about these situations they're going through so that we can be there for them? And so I've often said, sometimes even the wrong criticism you can learn from. Now, I also have learned not to take to heart every criticism. Actually, you taught me a saying that I've applied several times. One time you said, never take too serious criticism from someone you wouldn't ask advice from. And I think that's a valuable input to take. And so we were coaching together when you taught me that. And I think that's important to understand that. But at the same time, there are certain aspects, like you can take a nugget of truth, especially if the person signs their name to the criticism or who it is. I'm not much on any anonymous criticism. That's baloney if you can't put your name on there. But if you do, then what can I learn about it? Because there may be something that's just a wrong perception that you can take and help. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
No, it did. There's a learning in everything in that aspect. It's really, people are around us for a reason, something to take away. Typically as humans, we put a barrier up and we don't always gain that piece.
Yep.
But the mantra you have with Redemption, when you look at the walls and love God and love people and change the world, if you're not trying to listen, hear, and learn in all those settings, it's difficult to say you're living those mantras, right? So your response really puts those to heart. Going back to another piece, you talked about where the church engages with other churches, programming, denominational, non-denominational. Are there challenges, or do you find the churches that you work with tend to respect one another's platform, for lack of a better word? And that, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but the word that comes to mind.
I think it just varies from congregation to congregation. There's congregational leaders in our communities that won't talk to me.
Oh, wow.
But for the most part, people are gracious. They understand we're on the same team. The old saying is, we're all part of the same corporate operation. We're just different branch offices, so to speak. And so for the most part, I think we work together. I will work together with anybody on mission. You're not always going to have joint worship services because there's so many differences in types of styles in worship, and so that's not always going to be feasible to do that. But as far as ministry, like helping the community, helping the poor, you can work with anybody that wants to do that. And so we have something in the Jasper community called the Ecumenical Council, what that is the mayor put together this council. He said, I just want to know what the needs are. You're going to know better than me what the needs are from your churches. So some of those needs that came out of that, different denominational leaders, is that we needed some recovery houses for people who are transitioning from either prison, jail, or a lot of times just addictions in general.
And we're seeing those come into the community.
And so that was one of the big, 4 or 5 years ago when the mayor brought it. That's one of the big ones that came up. And now we've seen, we have the Dove House for women. We have Next Steps Recovery for men. Those are there, and more counseling. We knew that was a big need, and so we're starting to see more counseling happen. Several of the churches have counseling ministry, just like Redemption does. There's also some independent counselors that we support or encourage people to go to, and so those kind of things we work together with other people on and come up with those. And then some are like in the Tell City community, Perry County, and Martin County. We'll go to there's ministerial associations as well. That our campus leaders can get involved with there and work together for different things.
Obviously, 2023, 21st century, seems like it's changing at a very rapid pace. Certainly, it has to be changing at a much more rapid pace than any other century as each year goes by. When you look around the world, you look around the globe, around the region, and you look at churches that have similar structures focused on the restoration movement, what are the top 2 or 3 key pieces that your team keep an eye on to understand where the movement's going, how successful, where opportunities are?
It's a good question. I mean, I think we just always look out at what's happening and try to see, okay, first of all, where's God moving already that we can be a part of? Second of all, what are the needs in the communities? What are we used to use a term years ago called felt needs, because they may or may not have been actual needs, but people felt like they were needs. So it's experiential, and you try to look out and see that. And then sometimes it's just total society, cultural things. I'm talking with our staff and our technical crew about different areas of social media that all the young people are more involved with. Like you have the TikToks and things like that. I don't know anything about it. Not a big guy who goes out on. I do some of the other social media, but I know that is the single most powerful messaging system for young people right now. And so how do we leverage that and utilize to get our gospel-driven message through that vehicle? And so you're always looking at what are those kind of needs out there. We obviously knew during COVID that we had to get better at our streaming of our services, because there's times when people just can't be there. There's also a window into your church where people can check you out before they actually attend. And so we tried to work on improving that. And so we're always looking at Wayne Smith is a late great preacher from Lexington, Kentucky, and he used to say, you have to be anchored to the cross but geared to the times. And I thought that was a great mantra. Anchored to the cross but geared to the times. And so you got to look at what's going on in culture. Some people think you just do what you do and don't worry about culture. Well, I don't know. Jesus went where people was. Jesus talked in a lot of farming terms. Why? Well, that was an agricultural culture there. I mean, that was the biggest industry of that day in the area of the world that he was in. And so he talked a lot about farmers and gripping the plow and all those kind of things, because that's the culture he lived in. And so we try to do that, and that's the way you speak the language of your culture. The message doesn't change, but certainly the approach does. First person I ever heard say this was Rick Warren, and I don't know that he came up with it, but it was, methods are many, principles are few. Methods always change, principles never do. And I always found that to be very valuable, that the methods and the methodology that you use is going to change. If you don't think it is, why don't you go to a church that doesn't have any air conditioning? You sit on a hardwood bench. Most people don't pick that well, because that's not our culture today in America. But I can take you some places in the world where it is, and so that's kind of the approach, you got to look at what's happening, but not change the core of who God's called you to be.
And that can be difficult at times because of the pressures of the world around in that
Yeah.
regard. And with that said, as we bring this episode to a close, one other question is you talk about the restoration movement, the redemption focus, the story here at the church. How can the congregation help the church best stay true to that restoration vision and mission? What do you need from us?
Well, I mean, I think we talk a lot about those 3 T's, giving of your time and your talent and your treasures. We need all of those all the time, in that people that will volunteer, people that will use their gifts and their talent, and then obviously giving of the tithes and the offerings to support the missional causes that we have. Those are 3 crucial legs on the stool of ministry that it takes. You can't do what we do on Sundays with the staff that we have. I mean, I have a great staff. It doesn't happen. There's got to be people working in the kids ministry. There's got to be people greeting at the doors, people working in first impressions. We have people that watch out for the safety of the church, that are constantly around looking to make sure everything from security to health wise. We have people that are running the technology side, and by the way, they're constantly looking for people that can help with this audio-visual side. I mean, it's you do 3 services a week at Jasper campus, 2 services a week at Tell City and Lagodi. You constantly need people to fill those roles as much as possible, and some of it's as simple as pushing slides forward. Some of it's the art of sound and EQ in a room and stuff, but there's a lot of different things like that we need. So we need people to volunteer and to be a part of it. We need people on board with the mission of taking Jesus to the world. That's probably the biggest thing that is under, like when we, in church, a lot of times our worship leaders will say, you're on the mission field. And the whole concept is that you're here to be filled up, to be encouraged, to be equipped, to go out and do the work of Christ. So that's probably what we need more than anything, is people to love God and love people and change the world where they're at. Whether they're babysitting for their grandkids, or they're teaching in school, whether they're coaching a basketball team, whether they're working in a factory, whether they're leading an organization, whether they're walking in the halls of school, whatever it is, to take that mission with them.
And throughout 24, we're going to reach out and talk to some individuals who represent that very well at the church, and have them as a part of our podcast of the redemption story. God bless you, brother. I love you to death. Terrific words of wisdom and guidance. And you know, much of what you said you need from the congregation, that means being a little uncomfortable at times in
absolutely.
that regard.
We definitely
That's where
have
we
to
go.
make people uncomfortable.
Thank you for watching, Daryl, and I appreciate you. God bless you.